Okay, so it's been 6 months of development now, so I thought I'd try something a little bit different and put together a sort of a compilation video, roughly edited in the last 6 months of development. This, as you can see, is pretty much where it all started. I thought that this was my earliest video, but it turns out that I do have something a little bit earlier. That'll come up in a moment. But the original idea was that I was just going to move these ships around these planets. These really basic looking planets you can see here. This was my very first, very early mock-up in Unity. Delightfully called Planet Sim back then. The little ship is literally just a stretched cylinder, and I could sort of give it orders to move it around. It was very, very slow. Well, I mean, to move, that is. And it obviously all looked fantastic. We're using the Unity sphere there. Yeah, it sort of grew into this slightly more textured beast. This is just using textures that I grabbed off the internet. A model that I made in, I don't know, 20 minutes in Blender. I'm certainly no professional modeler. Much prefer programming, but you know, it worked. The idea was just get these ships moving around the planets. Something about it was intoxicating. There was no big plan at this point. It was just showing that I could do it, and it was a bit sort of jerky. There was no engine trails at this point, but the whole thing was just sort of built on this idea of using the mouse to click on this semi-transparent sphere you can see there around the outside, and the ships move by projecting a vector around the sphere, and that tells them what direction to move in. Added in the trails there. Then I had the great idea to start doing these development logs. I showed what my inspirations were. Battlestar Galactica is a big one. Homeworld, EVE Online. I'm using Unity, obviously. I also use Blender, you know, if I must. Core gameplay, literally, Earth's been destroyed. Aliens are chasing you. You need to jump from system to system, keep the fleet alive. It's a survival game. It's a bit of a fleet sim. There's certain ship types that have certain weaknesses and strengths. Ideally you have them all, but generally you won't. The idea then is that you've got the planet, which is what I focused on first. The idea will be it's sort of a real-time, full spherical environment down on the ground, and then you've got the ships in orbit as well, supporting them, moving from planet to planet. And then I kind of got sort of sucked into realism for a little bit. I mean, these textures are still just taken from the internet, but suddenly I went for the really grim, dark, black sort of thing. So it showed some debug ships here, which I very slowly select. Eventually, very slowly. There we go. Right, so a couple of ships put there on the planet. You've got a really basic UI, and you can select each individual one, even though they are identical. You got the outline of the ship there, which still works behind the planet. I think I've found most of that somewhere else. It's a bit of an asset. You can zoom in on the ships. They've got names, and you can move the UI system around. That doesn't really do much yet, but the idea is that each system of the ship can sort of act independently, and you can decide which one has the most power by moving it to the left. And ships got trails added in. As you can see, there's a day-night cycle, which is pretty basic at this point. You can have loads of ships, many ships as you want, but there is only 2 basic models at this point. And you can't group select. I didn't do group select. You can only select one at a time. I probably will add group select at some point. It looks nice. Continuing with the realism theme, we've got the rings working here. Again, textures I found online. The ring isn't based on particle effects. I do want to add that at some point. I added in sort of an inspector window so that you could select ships. This was really modeled on what real-time strategy games tend to do. And I was thinking at the time, I think, that there were going to be lots and lots of ships. So I wanted some way of keeping track of them all, what planet they were at. Added in the ship view. So space games generally like to do a bit of spaceship porn where you can sort of zoom in. You definitely won't get that from my ships. These things are very, very crude. I do want to remodel them at some point, but I'm focusing on getting some more of the systems developed before I worry too much about exactly what the ships look like. I just feel I'm going to end up having to reinvent them later down the road. Engine trails look quite nice, modeled on what you would find in EVE Online. This is sort of like a tracking thing, so you can find the ship behind other ships and behind the planets. This is sort of the early work of some formation flying. As you can see, it doesn't work particularly well. This is the destroyer class. Again, I am no Blender expert, but I really wanted to try doing something with a bit more style. I think personally I'm probably going to go back to really slightly more current day looking things, but you know, with a bit of a modern twist. Inventory, each ship has its own inventory, and this is an example of the kind of resources you're going to be able to carry. Interface heavily modeled on EVE Online. I sort of mapped it all out exactly what resources I want to have and how they're going to get turned into other things. You can see I went a little bit crazy here. Nice to have. Definitely not making use of yet. We've got a fleet inventory, so it gives you a list of all the ships and it sort of collates everything in one place. I figured we needed that, if just in case there was a lot of ships and you kind of lost what items were where. It'd get a bit confusing. And yeah, the windows move around. It's always good. Added in a lot more planets. So at the moment, this was just modeled, so they were literally in different places in space in the Unity window, and the camera system is just sort of moving from planet to planet. Again, this is still textures from the internet at this point. Speaking of textures, I tried out some normal mapping here. Mixed results. And this was my early look at doing units on the ground, sort of very basic shapes representing the colony. The idea that using light so that things actually, you know, you don't necessarily see it on the dark side. You do actually need to light things up. Vehicles have their own headlamps, that kind of thing. This was very preliminary. This is when I realized that the planets just really weren't interactive enough for my liking. This is about sending people down to the planets as well. Anyway, so then I spent quite a detour looking at planetary development. So this started out using a quad sphere. As you increase the resolution and sort of pop it outwards, you can turn it into a sphere. And the idea being it makes it easy to texture it because it's just made up of 6 faces. This is adding simplex noise, so we can control what sort of patterns we'll see emerging on the ground. You can add in another layer for the sea. And with a bit of work, you can make something that looks sort of like continents, you know. It's a bit wishy-washy. At this point, I was already starting to lose a bit of faith in it. We added in other layers based on the height, so we can add in, you know, like forests and desert layers over the top. And by adding these biomes, we could use the height data to sort of come to this sort of thing. It looks very rounded and it worked, but I knew I was going to end up throwing it out. But it could well be used in the future. This is a detour where I focused on some procedural climate. So the high points show where the rain is dropping the most. And the color bandings show the temperature. So blue is really cold. This is an example of a planet with low temperature and very little rainfall. Slight detour into some cratering. Haven't actually made use of this, but I will be using it in the more barren looking planets based on Voronoi noise. This is where I went with that. So now the colors represent the biomes that have been allocated on the planet's surface. Blue is still the ocean, of course. We can change the land-sea ratio, the temperature, the precipitation, the max number of continents, that kind of thing. The natural next step was to texture everything. This is actually splat map. This is procedural splat mapping based on the biome locations. And this is achieved through a semi-sophisticated projection camera system, which creates brushes in a sphere around the origin and then projects the texture based on the colors you see here, red, blue, and green. And that tells the system, or the cube mapping system, what textures it needs to put in each position. And so you see we've got the biome data there, and we can just transform to the textured mode. Then we moved on to pathfinding. So this uses A star. This is a fairly optimized algorithm that allows you to draw a path from one place on the planet to another, and it can do it from any point to any other point, as long as there's no, as long as there is a path, as long as it's not on a different continent. This is adding features, currently only trees, and demonstrating how the pathfinding system tries to go through the trees. Currently it's too high density, but we're getting there. Main menu screen, bit of atmosphere added here, and this was really to collate everything that I've been working on before, but previously it was several different branches. This is the what I call the creation dialogue. So this allows us to create scenarios, solar systems, and planets, and sort of organize it effectively. This is the hyperspace loading screen, so you can still carry on doing things whilst the current solar system is loading in. And then when it does, we have a complete rip-off of Star Wars here, but the ships lurch in, and that's where we are. Currently, I've been working on adding in some thumbnails to the creation organizers we see here. So it takes a little snapshot of it and saves it with the particular file. We've got the beginnings of the branch of the solar system editor. So this will be a map that will actually be used in-game, currently very bare. And more recently, I've been working on the atmosphere. My atmospheres were shocking. We now have a reasonably optimized Rayleigh scattering model here. I'd like to take credit for it, but I basically pieced it together from several sources found online. This is actually working in URP as well. And yeah, definitely works. You can see I've accentuated the atmosphere a little bit. I've moved beyond realism, but I love the sort of haze it adds over the top. And the star you can see there is another asset called MK Glow. And so that's where we are now. And that's 6 months of essentially prototyping, fleshing it out. And now I'm hoping for many more months getting this to gameplay and beyond. Thanks for watching.